Hello, can you hear me now? It's 2 o'clock. Hello, welcome, good afternoon. I hope you're all well, you're keeping out of trouble and you're safe and everything's okay and you're ready to do some drawing. So as always, please use the comment section. Today's quite complicated, I think. So if you've got anything you want me to explain or say. Hello, can you hear me now? It's 2 o'clock. Hello, welcome, good afternoon. Always forget to do that. Use the comment section if there's something you want to know or I can explain more of, or I've done something a bit too complicated and you want me to simplify it. No stupid questions. Always just use the comment section. Let me know where you're watching from and I'll try and mention you. So today is about foreshortening. So I'll get onto that in a minute, but I want to share with you an example from last time. So I want to show you, this is Danny's exploding sandwich. And I think he did a really good job here of a cheese and pickle sandwich. The bit I really like here, I really like the red onions. So 2 different colors there. And I think that's just a really charming bit of drawing. So well done, Danny. Looks really good. I also really love the backdrop there. So it's photographed really nicely on those daisies. So I think that's also really important, right? How you will present and show your work's really, really crucial. So as always, whenever you do anything, no matter how bad it is, always take really good care of it. Don't kind of treat it like rubbish, because then you'll feel bad. You'll feel like rubbish. So even if it's terrible, even if it's the best thing you've ever done, just treat it really well. Fold it up nicely, take the bits of tape off if that's what you've done, and store it. Okay, very good. So without further ado, let's get on with foreshortening. So I looked up foreshortening in the dictionary, and I tell you, I was more confused when I read the dictionary definition of it. So I would say, don't look up what foreshortening is, because I think it's really confusing. And I think that's part of the problem. Obviously, a dictionary definition is supposed to be fairly simple, but yeah, I just found it like really just a complicated explanation of it. So I'm going to hopefully do something today which will explain it a little bit more and demystify it, simplify it, and hopefully improve your understanding. I think like like a lot of these things, if you understand it really well, and it's kind of like it makes sense in your head, then I think when you come to draw or paint or even just look, it will start to become much clearer, and you won't panic, and it won't be something that you get wrong. Hopefully it will be something that you get right. Okay, so yeah, the other thing about foreshortening, F-O-R-E-S-H-O-R-T, hang on, F-O-R-E-S-H-O-R-T-E-N-I-N-G, that's 14 letters. And that, I tell you, is a long word for something that's about trying to compress something and make something smaller. So yeah, that's something else. People have been asking for me to explain about foreshortening. So that's really why I'm doing this. I think, look, like with all these things, these are skills. These are things that you can understand. And it's a bit like an exercise class if you want to be a dancer. So the exercise class in itself really just builds coordination, conditioning, muscle tone, strength, those kind of things. That's what helps you be a better dancer. And I think the dance is going to come later on. I think these sessions are a bit like that, or some of these sessions are. They're sort of exercises. They're like exercise classes that if you practice and you get better at them and you get better at understanding, when it comes to the main event, when it comes to the thing you really love doing, whether that's drawing an object, a person, a building, it doesn't matter what, it's going to make that activity much, much better. So try and remember that. It's really just something to practice. Right, let's get on with this. I want to go to this as the first thing I want to show you. Okay, so I made this suit that's hanging up there. And what I did was I put some black lines on the suit, and they're there for this reason. So what this does is the black lines divide up the body. There are 8 black lines, 8 black lines, 8 blue lines here, and they divide the body up into 7 parts. So I'd heard that thing that your head was 1/7 of the rest of your body. And I guess it is, because I took that photo and I divided it up pretty equally, as you can see. And so then I put those lines onto that suit. And that was the first thing that I did. And hopefully that's going to make things a little bit easier when it comes to understanding the next part. Right, so I'm going to draw something for you now. Okay, so let's think. What I've just drawn is essentially this. We're going to go back to something that we've explored together before. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Actually, let me get rid of those last 2 though, but 7, 8. Okay, so there we have 2 train tracks, 8 sleepers, and 7 gaps. So really all I want us to think about are the sleepers and the gaps. So as with normal perspective, we know that they don't actually get smaller when they go into the distance. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. The only 2 bits of information I want you to hold in your head at the moment are that the gaps are getting smaller and the lines of the sleepers are getting smaller. We know they don't actually get smaller, they appear to get smaller. So as on the right-hand side, they go into the distance, the gaps get less and the width of the sleepers also gets less, okay? So the gaps and the sleepers, they're the 2 things that I want you to hold in your mind. So on the left-hand side, I'm dividing up something into 7 equal parts with 8 lines. Okay, so hopefully that makes some sense. Okay, so let me show you this next. So this is something that I did earlier this morning. So this is my contemporary dance debut. I might pause it every so often. Right, so you've seen equal parts. I've now sat down against the wall and the top half remains the same, but where my legs are, the bottom half, that changes. So just all I really want you to focus on here, don't look at the silly things I'm doing necessarily, just look at the lines and the gaps and how they change. So there, on that pose, the hands are far away, so they're going to appear smaller. The foot is towards us, so it's going to appear larger. Perspective is important here. Okay, so when I'm lying down flat, you can see whether I'm standing up straight or I'm lying down flat, I'm parallel with the picture frame. So the gaps and the lines are all equal. However, when I go and start to change the angle of my body, and I'll show you this later on, the gaps between those lines are starting to change. So can you see at the top between my neck and my shoulders, that first gap is much bigger than the gap at my ankle. At this point, look at the point from my knee to my hip. But when I'm square onto the picture frame, that doesn't change. But then where my hand is in relation to my shoulder, that appears to get, the gaps appear to get less. Right, so let's go to there. So that might be a pose that you get in a life drawing class. And here, what I want you to see is the top half of my body. So from my waist to the top of my head, the gaps are all equal because they're flat on to you, the viewer. Whereas from my waist to my foot, that changes because it's coming towards you, and it's coming towards you at a different angle. So the gaps are going to alter. I think that's a good one that you can see. So I'll draw this for you in a minute, but you can see the gaps on my legs between the white, between the black stripes. That's starting to change in relation to the top half of my body. Right, so with that pose there, where something is coming towards you, that's really, with my right hand, that's coming towards you, the viewer. That's really, really critical in terms of those gaps and also how it's represented. How it's represented, we'll deal with a bit later on. Also this one, this is the classic foreshortening pose where you have the feet towards you and the head away from you. Now there, you should really be able to see that the distances between the black stripes is really changing a lot. Right, so I've changed the camera view here because I thought it would be good to see a different angle, because you might be looking down. So this is the same pose, lying down, and the gaps change, but they're not quite as dramatic as when it's very, very flat. So I'm doing the same kind of thing with my arms, and you can see that that's maybe a more natural pose, and the relationship between those stripes changes as it moves away from you. And then that one I thought was a kind of classical pose where there's something very, very close to you and something very far away. So my hand was close and my foot was far away. Right, so a little bit embarrassing, but hopefully that was all right. Let me see if there are any questions. No, not yet. Right, okay, so let's move on, and I'm going to show you, I'm going to do some drawing here. Right, so if we go back to some of the stills that I just showed you. Now, here on this drawing, what I've done here, over the top, and to be honest, I think like this is why it's quite, I think a lot easier to explain stuff like this with some digital media, because I think you can draw over the top of photographs. It's much kind of easier to see stuff rather than like when you're there. You can't really very easily draw over the top of something live, whereas we can take a photo of what's happened and then draw over the top. Now, like I was saying to you, in the pose where you're lying down, where I'm lying down and my head is close towards you, the viewer, my feet are far away, if you look at the gaps, that's all I really want you to focus on, the gaps between those. So the blue lines are drawn where the black lines are. And I think there you can really see how the gaps get less as they move away from you, the viewer. So I thought that was a kind of easy way to explain and show why I was in those poses. I guess an easier one to see is this one. So that one was the first pose I did, where the top half of me, the proportions were the same, and the bottom half, the feet were coming towards you, the viewer. So if you can see, the same rule applies. So on the first 1, 2, 3, 4 gaps, the lines get smaller as they move away from us. So the feet are close to us and my hips are furthest away. And like with the train tracks, the gaps between the train tracks appear to get smaller as they move away. And then the upper part of my body doesn't move further away, so it stays the same. So you can see the relationship between the top of my head and my chin and my chest and my waist. They don't really change. But the part that does change is the horizontal plane, the floor that moves away from you, the viewer. What else was I going to show you? Yeah, I suppose that one is a kind of more extreme one. So that's the one where somebody's lying down, going straight away from you. And these three lines, what they represent is the top of my head to the middle of me, and then the middle of me to my feet. Okay, so in reality, that's the same distance. And we know that from this, right? So we know that from this image. We know that we've got, from my feet, we've got 1, 2, 3, 4 lines. And then from my wrists or my waist, we've got 1, 2, 3, 4 lines to the top of my head. So in the other drawing, in that one, there are 4 black lines between the top blue line and the middle line, and there are 4 lines between the middle blue line and bottom line. But that really shows you how, as stuff moves into the distance, the proportions appear to change. Remember, the key word is appear, because they don't actually change. It just looks like they do. And look, I know that it would be really good, wouldn't it, if we were able to go to a life drawing class and have those kind of lines painted on the body, because I just think it would really, really help. So what I did something which I thought would be interesting, which was to I did the lines on the coverall, but what I also thought would be interesting would be to show you that happening live, because when you can see that when let me take that down actually, when my arm is outstretched, you can see that each of those are the same distance apart. But when I do this, the relationship between those gaps changes and it gets smaller. And I think it's really important to see that wherever my arm is, so there, for example, because this is horizontal with your screen, the gaps are the same. The gaps here are the ones that change because they're moving away from the picture plane. By the picture plane, I mean the kind of square on view that you have. And we have that really easily here because the camera that I'm looking at is square on, and the screen that you're looking at is square as well. So we can't really modify that space because the cameras are fixed and the screen is fixed. But I thought that would be an interesting way to show you how that works. And I don't have a tattoo, and I've never really wanted a tattoo. The only thing I'd like a tattoo of is something a bit like this, like a ruler maybe, so I could measure stuff. But I thought that was maybe a way that would help you understand things. Right, so I did a poll on Twitter, and I asked 3 questions. Do you find foreshortening difficult because it's confusing, like a confusing explanation? Do you find it difficult because you don't trust what you see? Or do you think your drawing looks weird? And by far and away, with 50%, people said that because the drawing looks weird. And I completely get that. I think foreshortened drawings can get really strange. But I think that also goes back to that thing of there's 2 things there. There's not trusting what you've done, and it's also worrying about what other people think of your drawing. Because if you think your drawing looks weird and you're okay with that, then fine. But if you think your drawing looks weird and somebody's going to criticize it, then probably that's like another issue going on. So I think I am all for things looking strange. So really don't worry if your drawing does look weird. I think it might be weird and right, or it might be weird and wrong. So I think with this, there's a kind of balance, isn't there? There's trying to get something right because you understand it, and then there's a sort of mistake because you don't really understand it. So I want to explore that a little bit. And what I found was, try and get it up. I thought the first thing that came to mind with foreshortening was this picture of Lord Kitchener. So I have moustache envy there. I think I need to go quite a long way before my moustache gets that good. But I think this is an image which everybody knows, and for me is a really interesting one to talk about in terms of foreshortening. And especially the thing is the hand, because his face is in the picture plane, so it's square onto the picture plane, so it's flat, whereas his arm and his hand and his finger is coming towards us. And that's what makes the image really impactful, but it's also what makes it quite difficult, I think. And so when I was looking at it, I thought I would, I did my own version of that. And when I was looking at this, I thought, well, I know that's right because it's my hand and I'm looking at it in terms of it coming towards the camera. So, I'm looking at it like that, but, that can look really, really daft. And I think when I started to think about drawing it, let's have a look here. So if we get the thing up. So if we think just about that hand. And what I'm going to do, I'm going to trace around it. So let's get the opacity down. So as always, I'm using an iPad with pencil and Procreate, and I'm doing that mainly because if I start drawing pencil behind me, you're not going to see it. So I don't love digital drawing necessarily, but I think for this it's really useful because there's lots more that I can show you by doing it this way. So I'm going to draw around the hand. So I think up to that point, kind of everything's all right. And then this is where it gets really difficult because it's that finger part that's coming towards us. Okay, so that then goes on to a head and neck and shoulder and right. Now look, this is where it gets really weird because when you take that away, that just looks mental, doesn't it? It just doesn't look like a finger at all. But we know that that's right because I've just shown you and I've just, I've done it really easily because I traced it, for goodness sake. So, it's not even about my judgment. It's about just copying and tracing what's there. But that does look like a really, really strange bit of drawing, but it's right. And I think when you think about this, that's kind of the most important thing, because going back to the where's the thing? Going back to where is he? There's another one. Lord Kitchener. I think that in the same way, that finger is really strange because it's quite difficult to read, because if the finger is coming towards you, then the closest thing towards you is the fingertip. So that should be widest. And then after that comes the knuckle of that finger, then the fist, then the wrist, then the arm, forearm, upper arm, and then the shoulder. And that's represented in this very strange area in the bottom left-hand side. And if you look at that image, the head is sort of disconnected from the arm. But that really feels like somebody's looking at you and pointing at you. So I think that's where foreshortening is used in a way which is kind of quite powerful and sort of fairly sinister, because it's very, very confrontational, that image. I'm going to do the same thing here. So let me just check if there are any questions going on. Is there a guide to what the percentage lines are getting closer and further away? Because I noticed the gaps are quite different. That's from Dear Carmen. So I think what you mean, do you mean, let's go to it. Oh, I know which one. I think I know which one you mean. Do you mean this one? So when, that one, right? So when there, the percentage of gap changes, gets less as it goes away. Now, I think that's kind of interesting. It's an interesting question because that depends on several things. It depends how close you are to the subject. So subject in this case is the Pascal on the floor. It could be that you're very far away. It could be that you're very, very close. So when you're very close, you get a very, very, I'll do it like that. You get a very extreme version of change. Okay, so as you can see, let me show you here. So there you get a very, very sudden extreme change from the first line, the second line, the third line. And then as it goes away, that changes considerably. So I guess, is that what you mean? Like the percentage changes more dramatically when you're closer to the object, to the subject. So here, the viewer is the camera. So when my hand, the object, the subject is really, really close, it's a very, very dramatic change. Here, and do the same thing, it's not so dramatic. It's much more consistent in that change. I suppose what I'm trying to do, I'm trying to show you a diagram. I've made a three-dimensional diagram of how that works. So I think you can kind of exaggerate foreshortening by changing that percentage. It's a really good question. I've never really thought about it like that, but I suppose it's like a more dramatic change or a less dramatic change. So yes, let me go back to that last drawing. So again, I think this is a sort of more crazy extreme version of that. So if we were to take that image, for example, and trace around this hand, it's just going to look mad. You know, that just doesn't, that looks like such a weird thing. It doesn't even look like it looks like something that lives at the bottom of the sea. It doesn't even look like a body part. So I wanted to do that because I wanted to say that if your drawing does look weird, don't freak out too much and don't worry. And certainly don't worry about what other people look like. I'm just trying to prove that your drawing can look very, very strange. So let's just have a recap, because I know that that's loads and loads and loads of information to take in. So yes, foreshortening is about perspective. So you have to understand the rules of perspective before you start to understand foreshortening. But really the two things that you need to think about from that perspective lesson is not about vanishing point, not about horizons. It's just about things appear to get smaller as they move away. And that's both real things and gaps. So when you're drawing a figure drawing, the way I will often reference it is like the relationship between the chin and I'll put a mark here and I'll put a mark here, a mark here and a mark here, a mark here and a mark here. So I'll be looking at those gaps and those relationships between those points. And it's the same if something is being foreshortened. It's the proportion you know is 1/7 or 7 times the head in the body, and you know those roughly equate to things like your elbow to your wrist. And I think if you start thinking about those points and the gaps between those points changing as they move away from you, that will really, really help, because I think there's a lot to take on there and there's a lot to kind of get confused about. And I think if you just strip it back to a few things that you understand, when you're plotting out a life drawing, or when you're looking at a building, or when you're looking at an object and it comes to foreshortening. Look, you can do this with a bottle, a baguette, a sausage, a building, a train, and also something very complicated like a human being. Foreshortening exists in everything. It's a little bit to do with perspective, with those 2 points, things appearing to get smaller as they move away from us. But really, it's about things that are close to us and the relationship to the things that are far away. And it's more when that thing starts to happen, where things start to come into view and then move back to the picture plane square, which is that. So that's to do with perspective, but that's also to do with foreshortening. So that is to do with things being close and things being far away, but it's also about things moving towards you. And when things are in line with what you're looking at, how confusing that can be, or how much you just need to think about those relationships changing. How if something like somebody lying down with their feet towards you and their head away from you, that the head is going to appear much, much, much smaller, but it's also going to, the relationship between the head and the feet is going to be dramatically different. And it's like that horrible thing that I was telling you, where your brain is telling you, hey, wait a minute, the head can't be that small. Because we know that the head is equal part to the wrist to the elbow, but actually it's visuals playing tricks on you and making things difficult for you. So again, your brain is trying to trick you and tell you that, yeah, make the head a little bit bigger, but actually trust your instincts, trust that what you see is right. But I think back that up with a little bit of information that I'm trying to help you with here about proportions and relationships. Yes. Okay. So the exercise this week, I think the exercise is probably just to find something like, I don't know, like a bottle, and then look at what that would be like. Not square on, because square on, you're just going to see that, right? So you're just going to see a really strange view. You're just going to see two circles. But the minute you start to turn that, you start to have two things happening. The perspective happening here, but also the foreshortening coming towards you. So, we can move that much, much closer. And you're going to find with that view, the top of the bottle is almost the same circumference as the bottom of the bottle. Okay, where my hands are, that's the circumference of the bottom of the bottle. Whereas when we do that, we know that it's completely different. And in reality, the top is probably, I don't know, 5 times the circumference, sorry, 5 times the diameter of the bottle. Okay, so in reality, we know that's the fact, but then when we do that, all that information starts to disappear and we start to doubt ourselves. Okay, so think about that. Think about something which is foreshortening as it comes towards you, and try and just do it simply with anything. It could be a pencil, or it could be a baguette or a bottle, and just try to explore those relationships and try and just reinforce it in your head so it makes sense. Because when you get onto doing something more complicated like a human body, that's when you'll get really tested, and that's when it becomes more difficult, but also the rewards are much greater if you get it right. Okay, I look forward to seeing you on Friday.